Hey everybody, and welcome to My Friend the Reader Man Booker Golden Man Booker Prize Edition. So, I think I mentioned in a previous video, this is the 50th anniversary of the Man Booker Prize, and as a part of their celebration, they are having a competition among the various winners over the years and awarding a prize for what's deemed, I guess, the best Man Booker winner. They've done this before. I think they did a 25th anniversary prize, and then they did the Booker of Bookers. On both those occasions, Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children, which arguably is one of the great books of the last 50 years, has won out. This year, they made sure kind of that wouldn't happen. I'm not sure if that was intentional. Just let me close the door over here. I'm not sure if that was intentional, but definitely that's how it ended up working out. So they just announced the list, and the way they did it is they had five different judges, one responsible for each decade. And so one judge would go and read all the books from the 1970s and choose one to be a finalist, and then another judge would do the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s, and then the present decade. Now, my familiarity with Booker winners that I've actually read is very minimal in the early years, so I can't speak much to those. But we'll go through them each one, and I'll give a slight description. I am hoping to actually finish this off. So the way it works is, so today they announced the short list. Then the voting opens, and it'll be public voting, which will start today. And then the voting closes on June 25th. And then the winner gets announced on July 8th. So I have read, of the 5 books, I have read 2 of them. I'm not sure if I'm going to go back and read them, but we'll see. And there's one that I started reading, and for various reasons I did not complete it, but I think this will give me the motivation to do so. Now, the first time is the 1970s, and this was judged by... I'm just clicking on the Man Booker website. Robert McCrum, who's a writer and editor, and I guess he's written a series of fiction and non-fiction books. And the one he chose to represent the first decade of the Man Booker is In a Free State by V.S. Naipaul. So I was lucky enough in my first year English class, my university class, which I've mentioned before, which had highs and lots of lows. We did read Miguel Street, so I have some familiarity with V.S. Naipaul, and I remember enjoying it quite a bit, but I've never read In a Free State. And I forget what year it actually won, so it was published in 1971 was the year it won. So I'll read the description. No writer has rendered our boundaryless post-colonial world more accurately or prophetically than V.S. Naipaul, or given its upheaval such a hauntingly human face. A perfect case in point is this riveting novel, a masterful and stylishly rendered narrative of emigration, dislocation, and dread, accompanied by 4 supporting narratives. In the beginning, it is just a car trip through Africa. 2 English people, Bobby, a civil servant and with a guilty appetite for African boys, and Linda, a supercilious compound wife, are driving back to their enclave after a stay in the capital. But in between lies the landscape of an unnamed country whose squalor and ethnic bloodletting suggests Idi Amin's Uganda. And the farther Naipaul's protagonists travel into it, the more they find themselves crossing the line that separates privileged outsiders from horrified victims. Alongside this Conradian tour de force are 4 incisive portraits of men seeking liberation far from home, by turns funny and terrified, sorrowful and unsparing. In a free state is Naipaul at his best. This sounds very interesting, and if it's anything in terms of the writing style that Naipaul exhibited in Miguel Street, I think this is definitely going to be one of my favorites of the 5. But we will see. It's an old text, so who knows? Does the writing hold up? 50 years after the fact, we'll see. So the next one that was chosen, this is the 1980s, and you can imagine the 1980s is probably a very difficult decade to judge. This is obviously the decade of Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children. It's also the decade of Kazuo Ishiguro's The Remains of the Day. I think what's his name, the South African author De Groot's book, The Life and Times of Michael Kay. So there are some heavyweights in this decade. Rushdie and Ishiguro's books probably not needing any more attention. Ishiguro obviously won the Nobel Prize last year, and Rushdie is more than well accomplished and well read, or broadly read. So anyways, this time it was Lemn Sissay, who is a poet, who chose the representative, and this one was a bit of a shocker. It was Moon Tiger by Penelope Lively. I've never read any Penelope Lively. I don't know what kind of style to expect here, and it's the e-copy of her book is not available at my library, or the 2 libraries I have access to, so it's very unfortunate. So I'm going to have to do some digging to try to get a copy, either a physical or an electronic one. We'll see, but let's give it a bit of a read. The elderly Claudia Hampton, a best-selling author of popular history, lies alone in a London hospital bed. Memories of her life still glow in her fading consciousness, but she imagines writing a history of the world. Instead, Moon Tiger is her own history, the life of a strong, independent woman, with its often contentious relations with family and friends. At its center, forever frozen in time, the still point of her turning world, is the cruelty, truncated affair with Tom, a British tank commander whom Claudia knew as a reporter in Egypt during World War II. I have to say I'm not that enticed to read this. I probably will pick it up. It seems to be a relatively short book. I know there are a lot of Penelope Lively fans out there, so it's probably worth to get a sense of why, what's so engrossing about her writing that brings readers back to her, and why it was good enough to outshine some heavy classic winners of the Booker during the 1980s. So we'll see. The 1990s, again, another very good decade, but the winner this time, just wait, the judge was, people know this, Camilla Shamsie, who was just longlisted this year for her book Home Fire, which I loved. I'm going to go back and read some more Shamsie, and someone who I think has an appreciation about the American, or so the British colonial experience. I'm not that surprised that she chose Michael Ondaatje's The English Patient. Ondaatje's from Canada, and I think also India, I think is his original background. He lives in Toronto, or lived in Toronto. I think he's still here. His other best-known book, In the Skin of the Lion, takes place in I think the 1920s and 1930s, while a major architectural construction takes place in the city. I haven't read it. I couldn't get through it. I wasn't a huge fan of The English Patient. It was a much beloved book. It was a bestseller. It was turned into a movie that won the Oscar for Best Picture in 1997, beating unfairly, I think in hindsight, Fargo. But nonetheless, it's a very powerful book, and it's one that I might actually go back and read, even though I've read it before. I've just put the audiobook on hold, so I might listen to it and see if I appreciate the 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 text in a different medium a little better. So this is a description from Goodreads. With ravishing beauty and unsettling intelligence, Michael Ondaatje's Booker Prize winning novel traces the intersection of 4 damaged lives in an Italian villa at the end of World War II. Hannah, the exhausted nurse, the maimed thief Caravaggio, the wary sapper Kip. Each is haunted by the riddle of the English patient, the nameless burned man who lies in an upstairs room and whose memories of passion, betrayal, and rescue illuminate this book like flashes of heat, lightning. I think it's a book that stood the test of time. I think people still go back and read it, and I think Ondaatje still has quite a following that emerged after this book's success. Sorry about that. There's some wind. Thankfully, we're getting a nice breeze in our house in this heat. But yes, so I think I will go back and read it. I think it'll be one of probably the strongest challengers. The 2000s, this one I have to say, not a surprise, and I actually think it's going to be the favorite. It was judged by Simon Mayo, who is a radio presenter, or Mayo, and it is Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall. I am sure most people on BookTube know of Wolf Hall. I tried reading it. It was at the start of when I went back to school. I went to law school. I gave up both on Wolf Hall and American Pastoral by Philip Roth, who are obviously like giants, literary giants, and for whatever reason, I guess the beginning of a very intense academic experience didn't allow for the kinds of enjoyment and immersion you need in 2 books like this. So Wolf Hall is England in the 1520s is a heartbeat from disaster. If the king dies without a male heir, the country could be destroyed by civil war. Henry VIII wants to annul his marriage of 20 years and marry Anne Boleyn. The Pope and most of Europe opposes him. Into this impasse steps Thomas Cromwell, a wholly original man, a charmer and a bully, both idealist and opportunist, astute in reading people and implacable in his ambition. But Henry is volatile, one day tender, one day murderous. Cromwell helps him break the opposition, but what will be the price of his triumph? This one will win. It's a popular vote. This is one of the most feted books in British publishing for the last 20 years. Hilary Mantel's sequel to this, Bringing Up the Bodies, also won the Booker. The 3rd book of the trilogy is coming out next year. I'm not sure if if the Booker will reward it again, but nonetheless, she's the only female author to win the Booker twice. She's a giant, and this book has been so widely read that I think the contemporaneousness of it, the fact that it's been written relatively recently, even though it's back in 2006 or 2008 or 2009, will mean that there'll be more readers, people who will be participating in the poll who've actually probably picked this up and read it. It was turned into a BBC series as well. So like it has seeped into popular culture, so I just don't see this one not winning a popular vote like that. But who knows, maybe I'm wrong. The last one, and I have to say this is the one I'm the most disappointed with. The last 5 years, 6 years of the Booker have produced some brilliant, innovative texts, including The Brief History of 7 Killings, which is this brilliant, intense, raw, violent, emotional book, almost told in spoken word by Marlon James. There's The Luminaries, which is a beautifully constructed mystery about theft and murder in the gold rush of New Zealand in the late 1800s. And what other ones have I loved? And The Cellar, which I didn't think was necessarily the strongest book that year it won. I still love Do Not Say We Have Nothing, but still, again, another spoken word type, emotional, witty, hilarious satire that I think those books just stand above the other ones that have won the Booker in the last 10 years. Yet the judge, who is this year, was Holly McNish, who is it seems like she's a poet. She went with Lincoln in the Bardo, which won the Booker this year.
by George Saunders. I'll read the description. In his long-awaited first novel, American master George Saunders delivers his most original, transcendent, and moving work yet, unfolding in a graveyard over the course of a single night, narrated by a dazzling chorus of voices. Lincoln in the Bardo is a literary experience unlike any other, for no one but Saunders could conceive it. It takes place in the midst of the Civil War. I'm just going to give you a brief description. Lincoln's son Willie has died. It is a devastating death for Lincoln. And while waiting for the funeral, he's kept in a crypt, and Lincoln visits him in three different times while there. And the story is told both through the voices of Lincoln and the ghosts of Willie, but also various other ghosts that are stuck in almost a purgatory state. That's the concept of the Bardo. I thought it was very ambitious. I didn't connect with it as well. I listened to the audiobook, which was, again, also very feted. It involved all sorts of celebrities doing the voices. It was very well produced, but I just couldn't get into it. It was almost a little too, twee is not the right word, but maybe a little too, where form has overpowered themes and emotion. My aunt loved it though, and other people loved it too, right? So I'm not sure if it's just me, but anyways, at the end of the day, I think there were stronger books to choose from the last 10 years, but it is what it is. I'm not going to go back and read Lincoln the Bardo. I think of all the books, it's going to be particularly hard to finish Wolf Hall. That one's definitely on my top list, or at the top of the list, as well as Night Pools, and I will try my best also to see if I can get my hands in Penelope Lively's book. Anyways, that's it. Before an award is announced, if I actually do get through it, I might do another makeup video, like a roundup video. Who knows, but we'll see. Anyways, thank you, and I will see you again at My Friend the Reader.